All right, question number one. A squat wedge feels unstable when we're squatting. Is there a way to make ourselves feel more connected to the ground as opposed to having that whole foot up on the slant board? And then follow-up question, is using the slant board a regular part of collegiate programming, or is it something specific to this block? So when we think about a slant board when we squat, we're really just thinking about the shin angle. So part of the equation when we think about depth on a squat is how much ankle mobility do we have? If we want to sit our butt cheek down to our heel, we need to have enough ankle mobility to push that knee forward over the toe. So if we think about our foot being flat on the floor, we have kind of a semi-right angle, 90-degree angle as a starting point for that knee to move forward. All we're doing when we elevate our heel on a slant board is we're opening up that angle so that it's more than 90 degrees. This is going to allow our knee to travel further forward when we go to sit our hips straight down. So it eliminates some of the ankle mobility that we might need to achieve a proper depth on a squat. So all that being said, is it really is up to you whether or not you want to put some of your foot on the slant board and some of your foot on the ground like I have here, or if we want to move even further up. All moving back on the slant board does is open up that ankle angle a little bit more so that we start further back and we can push our knees further forward and get lower in that squat position. But if we don't feel connected to the floor when our foot is this high on the slant board, there's nothing wrong with walking a little bit further forward. And if we don't feel like we even need to be this high on the slant board, we only want to elevate that heel a little bit, almost like an Olympic weightlifting shoe, we can do that as well. It's just opening that ankle joint up a little bit so we can get a little bit more depth at the bottom of our squat. This is not something that's specific to this block alone. The way we sequence our exercises at Collegiate is if we're thinking about practice one, specifically with team, we're going to go split squat, heels elevated, front squat, heels elevated, back squat, back squat. We're going to use that heels elevated position on a front squat and a back squat as a way to decrease the external load that's being used. So relatively speaking, when we elevate our heels, we're going to be able to maintain a more upright torso through that range of motion as we squat down. What that means is we're going to put more stress on the quads. Typically in that situation, we'll use less weight on the bar. When we're able to push our butt back a little bit more, hinge a little bit further forward in that squat, we use the bigger muscles in back, like the hamstrings and the glutes, which is great if we're doing something like an RDL, but it's less great if we're doing a squat and trying to target our quads. So elevating the heels, smaller muscle groups on the anterior chain, more stress on the quads, more growth from the quads, using less weight on the bar. And when the foot's flat on the ground, we can push our hips further back, allowing us to use a little bit more weight, but targeting different muscles than if we maintain an upright torso using that slant board. Or when we squat at Collegiate with our feet flat on the ground, if you're somebody who uses a weightlifting shoe most of the time, then when we go to using the slant board, you should still use that weightlifting shoe. Otherwise, we're just doing the same squat pattern all the time. So if we use a weightlifting shoe when our feet are flat on the ground, but then we take it away when we elevate our heel on the slant board, there's probably a good chance we're going to be able to use similar weight. And again, that's not necessarily the purpose. The purpose of using the slant board is to allow us to maintain a more upright torso and get more quad focus as we sit down through that squat. If I take the weightlifting shoes away, then there's no difference between those two blocks where our feet are flat on the ground and our heels are elevated. So we should keep the weightlifting shoes on and just elevate our heel even more on the slant board. It will give you that feeling of pitching yourself further forward, but you're just going to counterbalance that by using our hips to sit straight down as we go through that squat. You're going to have to use less weight, but that's part of the goal of that accumulation block, is using more volume, less weight, longer times under tension to force more quad growth. Question number 2 asks, with this high volume of a training block for our team class, would I still recommend doing one conditioning class per week? Or how would I structure the rest of my workouts around 3 team practices? So similar answer to what I've given in the past is I would still try to structure this probably more around a team practice, day off, team practice, day off, team practice. So in a 5-day span, getting 3 team workouts in. And then on that next day, either getting a conditioning or a hypertrophy workout in if I'm feeling up to it. There's a lot of reasons why I'd structure it that way. Number one, I would rather not go team, accessory class, back into team the following day. That creates 3 days of working out in a row without a lot of rest time. That's definitely not what I'd recommend specifically for this block. The other thing this lets me do is it puts a priority on whether it's team or strength. It puts a priority on getting those 3 workouts in first. And then if I get to that 6th day and feel like I have more energy in the tank to do another workout, to do a 4th workout for the week, then I can do that. But if I don't feel like I have that, if I'm sore, if I'm tired, if I'm unmotivated, then I can do something else. I can go for a walk, I can jump on the bike, I can do something that's going to be longer and slower distance as opposed to coming to a conditioning class and doing something that's a little bit more maybe VO2 max or high intensity interval training oriented. But it's really going to depend on you. How well are you sleeping? How well are you eating? How well are you recovering between workouts? I remain the same for my KPI assessment on this block as I did the last time that we did it. Any recommendations on how I could improve outside of just coming in more consistently? You hit the nail on the head when you mentioned coming in more consistently. That's going to be the first thing that you can do to improve. So if you're not getting your 3 days a week in, that's probably what you need to do to improve your KPI. Now, that being said, I'm a very solid example myself of maintaining the same KPI in multiple KPI assessments. So for those of us who are new, we're going to test these KPIs, key performance indicators, every 6 months. It usually runs January, so first month of the year, and then again in June. The KPIs we look for are a neutral grip pull-up assessment. So pull our chin up above the bar, 3 count on the way down. How many can we get? And then a body weight bench press. So throw your body weight on the bar, 3 count down to our chest and back up. How many can you do? So these are both relative body weight assessments. There are 2 ways to get better. The first one is to get stronger. That's going to equate back to what I just mentioned, which is coming in more consistently. We're not going to get stronger. Our training is scattershot with how often that we come in. The second way to get better at these is to lose body weight. So you can see how we filtered these KPIs into people's goals. Most people come to us and they either want to add muscle mass, hence get stronger, or they want to lose weight. So if we lose weight, we're going to be able to do more pull-ups. If we gain weight, adding muscle mass, adding good weight, we should be able to do more pull-ups. That being said, we're all getting older every single year, and we're not always going to be as efficient at adding muscle mass as we might like to be. So if you're somebody who is constantly doing during their KPIs double digits in pull-ups, or if you're a woman and you're hitting 4, 5, 6 pull-ups, being honest, that's really, really good. And you might not continually improve, and sometimes it's just good enough not to get worse. If you're already good at something and you're training consistently, and we see that number stay the same across the board, maybe we've just gotten as good as we can get and we don't want to see that number get lower. It's not always going to be you're repping out 20 strict pull-ups and next year you're going to be able to add a couple reps to that. Progress isn't always linear either. Sometimes we go up, sometimes we go down. Things you don't have control over, like what day the test falls on. If it's a practice 2 and you're coming off of a bad night of sleep where your child kept you up, or we ate too late and we didn't recover well, then you're not going to test as good and you're not going to have the opportunity to do that test again until 6 months down the road, where maybe if we started at 12, 6 months later only got 10, maybe 6 months after that we're up at 14. But it's not a linear progress of improvement. So getting in the train consistently is going to be the first one. And then it's either adding lean muscle mass or decreasing body fat, decreasing our body weight. Those are the ways that we're going to improve. And either one of those really come back to just training consistently. How do we at Allegiate feel about saunas and cold plunges, and would we ever think about getting one? Saunas and cold plunges are great. They're awesome recovery tools. I think that we could be pretty targeted in how we want to use these tools. On training days or post-training, I'd recommend not going with a cold plunge. Save that for non-training days exclusively. And I also like low-cost options. So there's a lot of places, especially here in LA, where you can pay to go use a cold tub. And I don't know that that's 100% necessary. I would look at it as, hey, can I make it down to the beach today and just do my cold plunge in the ocean? There's a completely free resource there that might not be as cold as a cold tub, but the water is also circulating. It's going to make it feel much colder than it actually is. And if we can do that, then we might want to think about investing into one of these other companies or brands or places that offer things like cold plunges and saunas. Now, saunas are great for the days that you train or even the days that you don't train. One thing that we can see from a sauna is an elevated heart rate. So we can get a similar effect on the cardiovascular system that we would get from doing some long, slow distance cardio, whether that's walking up hills or riding a bike. We can get the heart rate elevated into that zone 2, zone 3 by just sitting in a sauna. So I think that that's really, really good. The reason I don't like cold plunges on the same days we work out is because it's going to blunt the training effect. We are training to look good, feel good, play good here at Allegiate, and we want that training effect. That soreness is telling us, as long as it's not so over the top that we can't make it into our next workout, it's telling us that we've forced the body to adapt. The cold is going to mute that adaptation process and really make it so that that training wasn't what we wanted it to be. So while you might feel better because of the numbness, that doesn't necessarily mean it was good for you, especially post-workout. So save that for your non-training days and maybe save heat or save the sauna for our training days. Or again, you could supplement your cardio with a sauna on maybe one of your off days, depending on how recovered you felt. And as far as whether or not Allegiate would ever get one, probably not is the true answer there. I would say if we're not getting our 8 hours of sleep, we're not focused on eating half our body weight, or we're not focused on drinking half of our body weight in ounces of water, we're not getting our body weight in grams of protein, then those are the easier, lower hanging fruit that's going to get us a lot further in our path to whatever our goal may be than focusing on a 3 to 4 minute cold plunge or a nice long infrared sauna session. Last block for strength, we focused on less reps and faster tempos. This allowed for heavier weights. So for this block where the tempo is longer, how do we manage the weight being used? Should it be similar to last block? This goes back to alternating between intensification and accumulation blocks. As a reminder, or for people who are listening for the first time, accumulation blocks are going to have higher volume or longer times under tension, longer tempos. This is going to force us to use weights that are not as high, use less weight. Intensification blocks are going to be lower volume, shorter tempos, and that's going to allow us to use more weight. So last block where we had the faster tempos with less reps or similar amounts of reps, just shorter tempos overall, is going to allow us to use more weight. That's going to be more in that intensification block. In this block, where we're focusing on 5 reps or 5 reps each side, but with a 4-0-4-0 tempo, that elongates our time under tension pretty significantly. So I would not expect to be able to use the same weight that you did last block, this block. It might be okay for you to kind of set a goal in there somewhere of using similar weights on some of the movements, specifically the bilateral stuff. So in practice 1, we have a med ball Zercher squat. We've also got our feet flat on the ground there. If you think back to one of the questions I answered earlier about going heels elevated versus feet flat on the ground, we're going to shift our hips back a little bit more. We're going to get a little bit more help from the posterior chain. Typically allows us to use a little bit more weight than if our heels were elevated. So even though we have a longer tempo, we might be able to get closer to that weight we used last block when our heel was elevated. But it certainly doesn't have to be the same, and the intent and the goal there is not quite the same either. Now, a lot of the movements this block are more unilateral in focus. So even though it's just 5 reps each side, on a lot of those movements, that's going to take more of a toll than doing something bilaterally would. So even though we're only doing 5 reps, the time under tension might be twice as long because we have to go 5 each side. That's a different input on the cardiovascular system. It's a different input on yourself as a human being, as an entire organism. So even though the muscle group might only be 4040, so 40 seconds time under tension before we switch sides, that's still not the same. Again, let's just give the example of an overhead press. So a single arm overhead press with a 4-second up, 4-second down. While that might just be taxing, say, deltoid on one shoulder, that has still a taxing effect on the cardiovascular system, a taxing effect on the core, that even though we have to switch arms and that primary mover didn't have any tension when that other side was going, it's still a different effect doing 5 on the right, 5 on the left than if I had both arms going at the same time. From a cardiovascular, from the rest of the, you as a lifter standpoint, still a lot less time, even if it was both arms going 4 seconds up, 4 seconds down. It's 40 seconds as opposed to 80 seconds. So last block, when the tempo was faster and we only had 5 reps, it's just a lot less time under tension, whether we're going bilaterally or unilaterally. So in short, no, the weight should not be as heavy as it was last block. However, some of the movements you may be able to get close.